You know, sometimes a victim can't speak for themselves, but in this case, her body told a story of absolute, pure rage. It's a story all about how forensic science had to put together this brutal, brutal puzzle, not just to find a killer, but to give a voice back to the person he silenced.
I love this quote because it just perfectly captures what this investigation was all about. Think about it. Every single wound, every fiber, every tiny little clue, it was like a chapter in a book the detectives had to figure out how to read. And in the end, her body, well, it was the key to absolutely everything.
All right, so let's set the scene. We're in Olmsted Township, Ohio. It's one of those quiet residential communities. You know, the kind of place where you think this stuff just doesn't happen. But then, on a pretty normal Wednesday afternoon, police get a call about something that's very, very out of place, something really disturbing. So, when detectives show up, the first big question is, what are we even looking at? They got a call about something floating in a retention pond, but from far away, it's just a shape. You can't tell what it is. It's only when the fire department starts pulling it closer to the shore that the horrible reality sinks in. Yeah, this was no mannequin. Right from the jump, this scene was just baffling. I mean, the body has ropes tied around the waist and arms, but they aren't tied to anything. They're just knotted up behind the back. And then there's this. The victim is wearing 3 bras, but when they do a closer check, they find out the victim was biologically male. This discovery, right away, it tells investigators 2 huge things. First, the victim was probably part of the transgender community, and second, this could very well be a hate crime.
Okay, so the body is rushed over to the medical examiner's office. And that's where forensic pathologist Dr. Andrea Weiss comes in. Her job, really, is to be the voice for this victim who can't speak for themselves anymore. Her autopsy, well, it was going to be absolutely critical to unlocking the secrets of this crime.
And what she found was just shocking. The victim had been stabbed more than 40 times. 40. And most of the wounds were clustered right around the head, neck, and chest. That sheer number, it just screams something, you know? This wasn't just a murder, it was an act of extreme personal violence. Forensically, they call this overkill, and it almost always points to a killer who knew the victim and had this intense personal rage. So Dr. Weiss makes it official. She rules the manner of death as homicidal violence. Now, the detectives, they already suspected it, of course, but this was the official forensic confirmation they needed to really move forward. They knew they were dealing with a brutal killer, and the clock was ticking because he was still out there.
And then, during the autopsy, the X-rays show something incredible, a crucial piece of evidence. There's this flat piece of metal. It's clearly the tip of a knife, and it had broken off and was stuck right in the victim's skull. I mean, just think about the sheer force of that attack. This was huge for investigators. They now had a piece of the actual murder weapon, something they could maybe, just maybe, match if they ever found the rest of that knife.
But here's the problem. They had no idea who the victim was, and identifying them was a massive challenge. You see, being in cold water for months does terrible things to a body. The outer layer of skin, the epidermis, it just sloughs off. That made it nearly impossible to even tell the victim's race. And even worse, a process they call skin slippage had basically peeled the skin off the hands like a glove. So fingerprints? Totally gone. Based on how decomposition had slowed down, Dr. Weiss figured the time of death was months ago, probably back in December or January. Okay, so traditional ID methods are completely off the table. What do? The police put out a media release, hoping for a break. And it worked. Soon they started getting calls, mostly from the transgender community, saying the victim might be a young woman named Cece. They got a DNA sample from Cece's mother, and it confirmed the tragic truth. The victim was 20-year-old Cece Dove. She finally had her name back.
So now they have a name, Cece Dove. This changes everything. The whole investigation pivots. The question isn't who is she anymore, it's who would want to kill her. And the search for that person starts with the very first person connected to this whole case, the guy who found her. Yeah, the man who spotted the body, his name was Jeffrey Bland. But his actions were kind of strange. Instead of picking up the phone and calling 911 right away, he calls his boss to come take a look first. Why? Well, it turns out Bland had some outstanding warrants and really didn't want any police attention. That hesitation, it immediately put him at the top of the suspect list.
But you know, this is a perfect example of how forensic doesn't just convict the guilty, it also clears the innocent. That timeline that Dr. Weiss established was so important. Remember, she said the murder probably happened back in December or January. Well, that was Jeffrey Bland's alibi.
He didn't even move into that apartment overlooking the pond until the middle of February. That's months after Cece was killed. There's just no way he could have been the killer.
So, with their one and only suspect cleared, detectives are pretty much back to square one. It's frustrating. But then, a neighbor mentions something that seems kind of random. They remember seeing taxis at the property at all hours of the day and night. It's just a small, innocent tip, but it leads detectives to start calling local cab companies. And that's when they find their next huge lead.
Check this out. The police find this recorded dispatch call from January 5th. That date is smack dab in the middle of their time of death window. In this recording, you can hear a man asking for a cab to go pick up a female passenger in Cleveland and bring her to the exact address where Cece's body was found. And the pickup address? You guessed it. It was Cece Dove's home.
Now, detectives already knew Jeffrey Bland wasn't living there back in January, so they had to figure out who was. They tracked down the guy whose name is on the lease, a man named Jason Quinones. But Quinones wasn't living there either. He tells them he'd sublet the apartment to a friend who was kind of down on his luck, a guy named Andre Bridges.
And just like that, all the puzzle pieces start snapping into place, and they're all pointing to one person, Andre Bridges. He was the only person living in that apartment at the time of the murder. And as detectives start talking to people, witness accounts begin to paint this really dark, really disturbing picture of what happened on January 5th.
So on that very day, the landlord, Jason Quinones, shows up at the apartment to pick up the rent. He finds Andre Bridges outside, and the guy is frantic, just totally panicked, and his hand is bleeding. When Quinones tries to go inside, Bridges warns him with these words. I mean, this is chilling. Ignoring him, Quinones walks in anyway and just sees a lot of blood.
And this, right here, is where the whole case comes together. A search of that apartment turns up mail addressed to Bridges, including a hospital bill from January 6th, the very next day, for a cut on his hand. Then they find rope in the garage, and guess what? Forensics confirms it's a match to the rope used on Cece's body. And the final nail in the coffin, the undeniable link, a single drop of blood found on a heater in the bedroom. It was a perfect DNA match to Cece Dove.
So now you have it all. The killer, the victim, and the crime scene, all tied together with solid forensic evidence. Investigators had everything they needed to close this case and finally make sure that Cece Dove's voice would be heard in a court of law.
At the trial, Andre Bridges was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. And there's this one detail from the trial that's just so telling. Cece's family was there in court every single day supporting her. But the killer, Andre Bridges, he had no one. Not a single person was there for him. It's just a stark reflection of the two very different lives they lived.
You know, Cece's murder is such a tragic reminder of the absolutely disproportionate violence that the transgender community faces. This quote here from a member of that community, it just underscores the devastating impact of these hate-fueled crimes. And it leaves all of us with a really critical question. What is it going to take to create a world where tragedies like this just don't happen anymore?